Another survey. This is the 45th one.
45th annual.
So each year, I seem to find these commonalities from year to year with the top concerns among residents in this region. What were the top concerns this year?
Yeah, so we were asking residents what they saw as the biggest problem. The number one problem, far and away, identified was the economy. The economy is what residents are thinking about right now and what they're concerned about. Second to that was crime and safety, and beyond that was traffic, and then cost of housing.
Now, the economy wasn't number one last year.
No. The increase in the percent of residents who are concerned about the economy is something that we saw that was new over the last year. And beyond just being concerned about the economy, they're also quite concerned about the job opportunities that are in the Houston area as well.
So what indicated that shift? Why did they indicate that the economy was such a great concern of theirs?
Yeah, probably our biggest, clearest signal of that was asking folks to reflect on the job opportunities that every year we've asked folks, when you think about the job opportunities that are here in Houston, do you think of them as poor, fair, good, or excellent? And last year we had about 70% of residents say that they thought that the job opportunities here were either good or excellent. And so that really speaks to that economic pull that the Houston area has. This year that number dropped 29 percentage points to 41%. And that is an unprecedented drop in Fort Bend and Montgomery County, and is the largest drop we've detected in Harris County since the oil crisis of 1982.
However, this is not the oil crisis of 1982.
This is not, and that's one of the things that's left us with some questions, that what seems to be driving this decline in the economy. That you can look even back at the Great Recession, where you saw a little bit delayed in the Houston area, but there was this notable downtick in how folks were feeling, but you still had this precipitating event that you could look at and say, that's the reason this is happening. We don't have an event that we can point to. And so we're sort of reading this as a general sentiment around the economy, how things are going, expenses of things, and just how people are feeling about society today. And it's not a great endorsement about what's going on, unfortunately.
I know the participants vary in socioeconomics and demographics. So was there a certain group who really stressed or reflected in those numbers of their concerns about the economy and those job opportunities?
We saw financial stress increasing across all income categories. That it didn't matter if you're making $150,000 or $15,000. You were telling us that your financial stress had gone up in the last year. And again, sort of speaking to the way that people were feeling about the economy and just how things are going financially.
Now, as researchers, is this something to be expected? Because when you zoom out and you look at the nation, right, there's been a lot of anxiety around the economy and jobs and the workforce as well, too. So were there really any surprises for the Kinder Institute in seeing these numbers?
Yeah, so knowing that that data was out there, that was one of the reasons for us that we wanted to focus on the economy with this year's study. Anticipating that this was something people were thinking about. And so that people are more concerned than they were last year, that's not necessarily surprising. The magnitude of the shift over the year caught us all by surprise. And beyond just that magnitude, really the across-the-board shift as well. Now, there were some signals that a lot of this economic stress and pressure was being felt, especially among middle and lower income earners, but that you see some pressures across the entire income spectrum, again, just speaks to the totality of the experiences that people are going through in the Houston area.
In looking at the research and analyzing it, is this something that residents or participants you think see as short term, or is there something deeper here?
That is our question. And as additional data comes in, again, as we talked about earlier, we have this great opportunity where we're continuing to go back to residents multiple times within a year and across years as well. And so already we are beginning to make those plans for making sure that we're getting that follow-up information. We're able to understand, is right now, this year, is it a blip? Is this a moment of perhaps increased concern and tension, but that ultimately it sort of dissolves and unpacks itself, and we see next year taking back off again? Or do we plateau where we are, which okay, or we've seen in the past, sometimes there's a stair-step pattern that takes place, that while we saw this large drop this year, do we see that continuing to decline next year? We do not obviously know the answer to those questions right now, but we're already talking about how do we collect the data to be able to answer it.
What about those who are the most vulnerable, those people who are just getting by? What information did they provide the Kinder Institute within the survey?
Yeah, so one of the questions we've asked now for several years has to do with our $400 question. We call it our $400 question. And at the end of the day, what it boils down to is if you had a $400 unexpected expense, how would you pay for it? Would you pay for it with money that you just have, or would you need to go borrow that money, or just simply be unable to cover that cost? And when we were asking that question this year, among residents making less than $25,000, nearly 80% said that they would either have to borrow that money or they just simply would not be able to pay for that cost. And that was about 9 percentage points higher than it was last year. And so again, you're seeing that increase, that tick up on the strain and stress that people are feeling, in particular at some of those lower income levels.
I know in years past, and I believe it was just even last year, there was some concern regarding housing affordability. And again, that's not just a Houston problem, that's a nationwide problem as well. What did they share about housing affordability? And did they see that as stabilizing or still rising, still hurting them, still limited?
Yeah, so over the last 2 years, when we were talking about the biggest problem facing the area, we saw a slight decline in the percent of people who were saying crime and safety was the biggest problem. We saw a pretty steep decline in the people saying that traffic was the biggest problem. We did not see a very big change at all in the percent of people that raised the cost of housing as the biggest problem. I think last year it might have been 14%. This year was about 13%. So the cost of housing continues to be something that is putting pressure and strain on people's budgets. And that's complemented again by those costs at the grocery store, childcare, transportation, all these other day-to-day expenses that sort of get packed into that economy space are shared as well within that cost of housing. And so people are feeling pressures on their budgets right now.
It's interesting when you mentioned traffic just now because, for years, everyone has said that traffic has been one of the biggest problems, if not the biggest problem. And definitely just, in casual conversation and talking to people, everyone complains about the traffic, no matter your financial background or financial standing, right? But this year, traffic took a back seat.
It took a back seat. I think it's also always important for us to keep in mind, we're asking for what is the biggest problem, not as what a big problem might be. And so I don't want anybody to get the perception that we solved traffic in the last year. Anybody that's driven for 5 minutes in Houston knows we have not quite cracked that nut yet. But it just speaks to the priorities that people are having, and that last year there was really this call around traffic was this big priority for people. The economy overtook it this past year, and so traffic stepped back. Doesn't mean we solved it, doesn't mean it's not a problem. It just means in terms of the priorities, people look at the economy as something a little bit bigger.
And maybe it's more of an issue the further you live out, too, the longer you have to commute, I assume. I don't know what traffic looked like for survey participants out in Montgomery County and Fort Bend counties versus Harris County.
Yeah, exactly. So last year, traffic was the #1 problem raised by both Fort Bend and Montgomery County residents. And I believe about a quarter of those residents raised traffic as the biggest problem. In Montgomery County, you actually saw that number almost cut in half this year as being lifted forward as the biggest problem. And you saw it tick down within Fort Bend as well. And so again, there was definitely that, maybe you could frame it almost like a reprioritization that might have been signaled there. And again, wanting to make sure traffic was not solved. And anybody that's living up in Montgomery County can attest to the fact that there are still those challenges of how they get that infrastructure built out to keep pace with the incredible growth that area is experiencing, and ditto for Fort Bend. But just acknowledging that in both of those counties, the economy was the #1 biggest concern that they lifted forward this year.
Crime is still of concern for residents in all three regions, or all three counties, rather.
Yes, that was our second highest, second most commonly identified biggest problem for all three counties.
And what's driving that? Is it the crime numbers per se? Is it, dare I say, the media and their exposure to just how many different incidents are occurring, or what they're reading on their Reddits and their social platforms? Yeah,
so we've begun to try to unpack where some of this concern around crime and safety is coming from. And one of the studies that's not related to the KHAS report, but that we've been working on, has been looking at information sources, where if I'm watching local news, if I'm on social media, if I'm if I'm keeping up to date with police reports, is that influencing the way that I feel about crime and safety going on in the Houston area? And right now, we're struggling to actually identify a very clear pattern where that does not seem to be one of the driving factors of what's going on in terms of people's perceptions of safety that's happening within the Houston area. And so for us, a lot of what we're seeing out of the data is coming back to personal experiences with crime and safety. And then one of the things we did look at with this year's report was that sense of connection that people are feeling with one another, that the more connected that I feel with my neighbors, the folks I'm living on the same street with, or in some cases the same building with, if I'm in an apartment or duplex situation, my relationship with them is actually shaping how safe I feel here in the Houston area and how safe my neighborhood is in the Houston area. And so that was one of the factors that we wanted to lift forward, acknowledging the role that social connections play in our sense of safety.
It's interesting because, I saw that looking at social connections and reading about it and how people felt. I felt like it was the first time that we were really tapping into the emotions of participants as well.
Yes, and so, one of the things we wanted to make sure that we're clear on is we're not looking at crime data. We're not trying to replace crime statistics that are being replaced with our research. What we're trying to do is to understand that, I think maybe an example here is worth looking at, where the crime rate in Harris County is higher than it is in Fort Bend or Montgomery County. And there's no judgment, there's no any kind of commentary there. It's just a statement of what the facts show. Yet you still have very similar levels of concern with crime and safety in Fort Bend as you do in Harris, as you do in Montgomery. And so when you have these differing levels of crime rates, and again, markedly different levels of crime rates in Fort Bend and Montgomery versus Harris, but yet similar levels of concern, it starts to speak into something that's less about what is being always driven by what's happening on the ground, and it comes back to psychology. It comes back to the feeling question, as you're putting it. How do I feel about crime and safety? And so that is what we wanted to try to look at with our study, is to unpack those feelings around crime and safety, acknowledging obviously actual crime and unwanted nuisance behaviors is contributing to those feelings, but there's also other elements that are at play. And so again, for us, one of the things that emerged that was very fascinating was the importance of how well I feel connected to others, shaping that sense of security.
Mm-hmm. And with connection, you have to take into consideration division. So did people feel divided, and where did we see that division? Was that amongst different races, different socioeconomics, demographics there? So
our initial plan was to look at social divisiveness. That looking around the country, looking at other research that was coming out, there was all this evidence building that we are in a moment of extreme elevated social divisiveness. And lived experience can tell you all you need to about the accuracy of that. And so as we began to explore that social divisiveness question, we kept coming back to the issue of diagnosing the problem is one thing, but how do you start to move people in the direction of solutions? And so rather than just simply stay focused on this question of divisiveness, that is where our pivot took place to we want to address social divisiveness. We don't just want to describe it, we want to do something about it. And so that's where we started to lean into this space of connections. And so we actually ended up moving away from questions about divisiveness to instead get at how well connected do you feel personally and professionally? Again, how much connections do you have with your neighbors and folks you live around? And then also, how well do we know one another here in the Houston area?
Mm-hmm. People who felt better connected, did they feel better about other areas of their life as well too?
Connections made huge impacts all across the board. When we were looking at things like people's wealth and economic mobility, their personal and professional connections were as important as the amount of money they were making in terms of their views on economic mobility. When we were looking at people's physical and mental health, again, income matters, but so too do those connections that I feel like I am having with my neighbors, with my friends and family. And then again, going back to that sense of safety, the more connected I feel, the safer I feel as well, and the safer I am as well.
Talking about divisiveness, the issue of immigration definitely leaves people divided. What did you see in the survey in regards to immigration and the changes impacting just overall growth and sentiment here in the Houston area?
For sure. And so with regards to immigration, we did not necessarily include that as part of this year's report. However, we have done several studies looking at the attitudes around of Houston area residents on immigrants. And I think while at a national level there is some degree of disagreement on this question of immigration, in the Houston area there is not. In the Houston area there is a very clear message about the value and appreciation and contribution that immigrants are making to our economy, to our culture, to our communities. And that is not just a statement about legal immigration, that is also a statement about undocumented individuals and those residents that may not be here with all of the paperwork in place, but they are nonetheless important contributing members to this community. And so we have looked at that twice now, both back in January of 2025 and then later in October, November of 2025, and attitudes around, how do you address this issue of illegal immigration? Overwhelmingly, Houston area residents, and I'm talking like 7, 8 out of 10 residents, want to see increased pathways to citizenship. When we are talking about the issues of different groups of people and maybe we could deport certain types of immigrants, time and time and time again, Houston area residents oppose the deportation of particular types of immigrants that might be here. The one exception are immigrants that have committed some sort of a crime, and in which case Houston area residents understand that those are not the people that you are interested in having. And I think, again, there's collective agreement there around removing those individuals. But otherwise, Houston is very much, we are an immigrant community. 1 in 3 residents in Fort Bend County, 1 in 4 in Harris, 1 in 6 in Montgomery County, born in a country other than the United States. We are an immigrant community, and this is not just some sort of a facade or performative statement. They are integrated, embedded, and appreciated within our community.
So this region may not be as divided when it comes to immigration than others, or so perceived.
There obviously are people that are going to disagree, and disagreement is healthy, and it's important for us to have that. But on the whole, when you look at the general trend, no, there is not a confusion about the role and importance that immigrants play for the Houston area.
There's so much involved here with the survey. We're rounding the corner. So I want to talk to you about something that in all 3 of the regions, I think people have been impacted by the weather, right? And that has been an ongoing conversation for a number of years because of our weather systems that we have seen. Although it didn't rank among the highest, it was still of great concern. Why is weather still of such great concern for residents within this region?
We're learning, is I think the short and the sweet of it. We are understanding that just because 2025 might have been a relatively tame year weather-wise, that does not change the fact that we are very much front and center a 12-month-a-year disaster area.
Not just hurricane season.
It's not
You're
just
absolutely
hurricane
right.
season anymore. Freeze events are a thing for us. Hurricane season obviously being a thing for us. Severe weather, again, I think it was Saturday, my neighborhood got something like 2.5 inches of rain within a very tight time frame. And so there was flooding that was
Thunderstorms
taking place.
that turn into severe weather events.
Severe weather events, exactly, happening at the same time. And so this is a reality that Houston is embracing and understanding about itself. And in that understanding, there's a recognition that just because I don't see it every day doesn't mean it's not a problem, and doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking about it and doing something about it. And so we were asking residents about their concerns with natural disasters, their concerns with pollutants, as well as their concern of just environmental exposure, recognizing for many neighborhoods in the Houston area, we have aging infrastructure. And here what I'm thinking about are the pipes in the ground and the pipes in our walls. That if those homes are old enough, those pipes can become dangerous for us if they're putting in those heavy metals into our water that we're bringing into our homes. And so how are we as an area preparing ourselves for that? Because right now, residents are concerned about these elements of the environment and its impacts on their health.
And they acknowledged that within the survey, beyond just weather, those environmental impacts as well.
Exactly, yes. And one of the things that we found interesting and important to emphasize here, this is not a statement, this is not a testimony of social inequality. It did not matter what your income level was. You are concerned about flooding. You are concerned about cold and freeze events. You are concerned about extreme heat. You are concerned about CO2 emissions. you're concerned about the environment. Now, there were some differences in the built environment. We do want to acknowledge that. But also, even for some of those where I think one of them was, I'll just use the lead pipe example again, 49% of residents making over $150,000 reported being concerned about that. That is lower than I think it was in the 70s for folks that were making less than 25%. It's still half. That's still half of individuals making over $150,000 expressing concern about the safety of their water coming into their house. And so we're not talking about a have and have nots. We're talking about a whole that recognizes the challenges that their environment faces for them. And again, they're interested in seeing action taken to be able to do something about that.
Going back real quick to weather, because it is such a big topic, talker, and concern, did people express if they're feeling more prepared or more vulnerable in these situations?
Oh, you've got your crystal ball broken out here. We're actually asking that question right now. And so we are in the process of
in a different survey.
In a different survey. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. We've got a. Again, we keep moving,
Yes.
And so we've got a new survey. It's already in the field. It's looking at really focused on community and public health in particular, and disaster preparedness. Back in 2024, before we had the derecho, the thunderstorms, the flooding, and then Hurricane Beryl, all seemingly within a 72-hour period, it felt like. It was stretched out.
It felt that way, though. It really did. It was back to back to back.
Yes, back to back, and especially for folks that were experiencing multiple of those events. Early in 2024, we had asked residents how prepared they felt that they were for natural disasters. And one of the things that we found for the Houston area was that in general, residents are more prepared than a national sample. We were using FEMA survey data that they had administered around the entire country, so we could compare how prepared Houston area residents were to elsewhere around the country. And we found ourselves to be more prepared, which is great, and arguably we should be. Again, going back to we are a 12-month, a year disaster zone. And so we should be more prepared. And I think one of the things we're interested in seeing is now, having gone through 2024, do we see a few more folks raising their hand and saying, not only are we more prepared than the rest of the country, we're more prepared than we were in 2024. That would be a step in the right direction, because those preparations aren't going to stop that extreme weather from happening. That's not the reality. But if we're preparing ourselves appropriately, it puts us in that position to bounce back a little bit faster.
When people hear this information, it may make them feel a little bit more anxious, right? Like the thoughts that I was thinking, like, oh, the economy is not good. I'm worried about the economy. I'm worried about crime. It seems dangerous out there. What about this research should give people hope?
A big chunk of it is the fact that this is research that is getting into people's hands who can do something about this.
Whose hands?
This is about local community nonprofits. This is about local government, so city and county folks and officials. This is about sharing it with those people that are able to look at this research and understand what are the concerns that people are feeling, and then think about how are they adjusting resources. And so I think about our partnership with the United Way. When we share research with them about some of the financial strains that people are experiencing, they're using that information to connect to their partners that are hundreds of nonprofits spread throughout, again, Fort Bend, Harris, Montgomery, Waller County as well in there, working with them to understand here are the circumstances and conditions that people are going through right now when they are coming into your organization. And so it helps to reinforce and reaffirm the work that's getting done in there, as well as pointing to new challenges that might be emerging for folks. And in particular, this is where we saw housing as a challenge that we were able to get into the hands of United Way so that they were able to talk with their partners and just help for folks to understand that it was likely that they were going to have more people coming into them expressing challenges around housing. And so it gave them a chance to prepare a little bit more for that. Now, while we are talking about some of the work that nonprofits do, which are incredibly important in the Houston area, when we are talking about trying to resolve some of these issues, the economy, the environment in particular, we have to be honest with ourselves and acknowledge these are not problems that you and I are going to solve. No nonprofit is going to solve this single-handedly. This really is that moment where it's about making sure we're bringing this information into elected officials, into committees, into individuals that are at that level of government and leadership, so that they are able to use that for data-informed decision-making. And so that's responsibilities that we have here at the Kinder Institute to make sure our research is getting out there. It's also, again, you all within the media helping to elevate this narrative and bring this story out into spaces so that more residents are aware of this and bringing this into the hands of decision makers. All of these become important factors in making sure that this research doesn't just sit on shelves, but rather it gets put into action.
It works for people. It goes to work for people, I should say. In closing, let me know, do you think Houston is at a turning point, especially seeing some big changes with these concerns and some that we haven't seen in decades at the numbers they are?
Part of the challenge with trying to identify an inflection point is to recognize what is the event that is perhaps precipitating that inflection point. And in the absence of having that event, it is not clear if we are over it, and so we'll find ourselves bouncing back because Houston has a resilience where it is going to bounce back, and oftentimes stronger than it was before. We've seen it time and time again. If we're not through whatever is going on, if we don't have an end to this thing that's happening, that's driving our views on the economy, and again, just to make clear, while we've talked about perceptions, there's a reality behind these perceptions that's backed up by the numbers. The Houston area was projected to add 70,000 jobs in 2025. It added less than 20,000 jobs in 2025. So when people say the job situation here is not that great right now, that's not just because I feel a certain way. It's a reflection of what our job situation is doing right now. As we see jobs recover, as we see new opportunities emerging, it's very likely you'll see Houston turn that corner and move on. If we keep seeing data coming back in that suggests our jobs are either staying flat or perhaps continuing to struggle to grow the way that we are projecting them to grow, there's a chance that when we're going back out there for data next year, we're going to see very similar information from people feeling that stress and strain on their finances. Hopefully, we're able to see that corner getting turned and we're able to find those jobs and those resources showing back up to the area. But that, again, is one of these things where without knowing what the exact event was that's perhaps driving some of the sentiment that we're seeing, we have to wait to see what data come back to suggest, are we moving in one direction or the other?
Dan Potter with the Kinder Institute, thank you so much for all of this background and collective information about all the research that's taken place. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.